Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming. My name is Hollow and this is the Switch Axe Guide. Today we're talking about absolutely everything we can for this weapon, the basics of the main systems, and all of the attacks and combos that you can do. Naturally, the video will start in a more basic level and gradually get more and more advanced, so as always, please check the timestamps and make use of them to learn about the stuff you specifically care about, or maybe come back to when you're ready. It's going to be dense, there's a lot to talk about with this weapon in particular, so let's just begin. So here we are once again in the training room, and as a heads up, I'm wearing absolutely no armor and just like a basic hope switch axe to minimize the confusion about the numbers, keep everything clean and clear. To start with, we like to talk about the main systems of a weapon, and for that we always come to the play guide and we take a look at the weapon controls. Here you can get lots of information about your weapon, combos and extra details if you want to check, but the thing we're interested in here is weapon properties. So of course, a key component of this weapon is the sword and axe mode. All you need to do to transform your weapon once unequipped, or unsheathed rather, you just press R2 or the transform button. We go from sword to axe and back, super simple. However, there are unique morph slashes that depend on what you've just done beforehand. So even something as simple as moving, I can do a forward moving morph slash. So what combos and what you've just done can lead into new combos in regards to morphing. But this brings us to the switch gauge. The main way that you build this gauge, as it says, is deal damage while using the axe. There's a little notch there that lets you know that you can't go into sword mode unless you're past that, which is 30% of the meter. But on the bright side, this gauge does fill as it's sheathed, but you can see that while I'm in sword mode, any attack that I'm doing is consuming that switch gauge. And then as we go into axe mode and start hitting something, we build it. So the switch axe gauge has dropped down below that notch, below 30%. So you see how the sword gauge is just gone now. To refill that, you can just use attacks while you're in axe mode, or you could try to transform into sword mode and you'll see how he kind of reloads it and then we bring back that gauge. The problem is that animation holds you in place, leaves you very vulnerable. You never want to do that. So if you can avoid it, I'd recommend a ledge or aerial hop and then you do the reload while flying through the air and you get this kind of quick reload effect. So a really reliable way to get one of those aerial reloads is just pull up your seikret, leap off the back and do an aerial reload like that, really smooth. You know, if you absolutely have to, that's probably the way I'd go about it. Next, let's talk about power axe mode, which is literally that little area on the left side representing the axe's blade, as it were. When power axe mode is active, we actually fill that switch gauge faster, so it's well worth it just for that, but it's also a damage increase for the axe mode as well. Since we do use transformation attacks, it will be relevant to that. But there are thankfully a variety of ways of activating your power axe mode. One of the common standard ways is to perform 2 wild swings and then a triangle to do a heavy slam. And as you can see, we've got it lit up, we're now in power axe mode. Next we have the amp gauge, which is what you're building as you deal damage with the sword mode. When that's full, it enters the amped state. So the vial type of your weapon begins to pop. In the simplest terms, it's basically adding some damage to every single attack that you do. So you can see that as I attack, I'm spending that switch gauge since I'm using sword mode attacks, and I'm building the amp state. Now it's full, it's active. You'll notice that I got a little bit of switch gauge when it activated, but yes, now I'm dealing sword attacks in the amp state, we're getting that little extra burst of damage, which is really nice. Couple of mechanical details for these states. We have power axe mode, which you can refresh the timer on every time that you do a new heavy slam, but you'll see that the amp state of the sword cannot be rebuilt or maintained until you've lost it and then rebuild it again. So, you know, if it's about to run out, you can't like reset it and keep the timer going. Lastly, as you can see, there's quite a few vial types. So depending on the weapon that you have and the vials that it has, different things occur. So power vial is extra physical damage. Element vial, element damage, sure. We got poison, paralysis, exhaust, but then on top of all of that, we also have an element one that's specific for dragon that just adds extra dragon element. Be aware that some vials build their amp state slower than others, and you'll probably feel it. But now we're ready to talk about the axe mode. So this is by default the more mobile of the two modes. You'll find that as I'm moving around here with the axe out, that's a reasonable movement speed. But as I pull the sword out, I'm actually hunched over and moving slower, and that's the theme of the weapons. Axe mode is the one that's going to be a lot more mobile. For example, when you're moving, you can do something called a fade slash or a forward overhead slash. So moving forward, I do this forward attack. Moving backwards, we'll do a fade slash. This can actually be comboed for great movement using transformation, so if we go forward with the overhead and then transform into a moving forward morph slash, we make the distance. But yeah, general rule for you, axe mode is the more mobile one. For the axe mode triangle combos, we have the overhead slash into side slash into spiral burst slash. What's key about this, spiral burst slash. Spiral burst slash is a specific move that you're going to really care about because it builds the most switch gauge out of every axe attack that you have. So accessing that specific move is very important and we'll talk about it. For now though, I just want to talk about the basic combos. So there is also a forward moving triangle attack called the forward slash, but you can see that the distance that it makes isn't massive. It kind of locks you in place for a moment. Personally, I much prefer using the forward circle, which is a bigger gap closer. And then as I showed, maybe a transform to move forward at that point. But you can combine the two with like a forward slash into a forward overhead slash. That's an option too. For the circle attacks, you're going to find the wild swing is back, consuming stamina as we swing this over and over and over for meh damage. But this does chain into a lot of things. For example, if you let it swing at least 2 times, then press triangle, you go into the heavy slam, which as we said, activates power axe. It's very important. But if you do it once and then press triangle, you'll instead go into overhead slash, the normal triangle combo, ending in spiral burst slash. So be aware if you're trying to do wild swing into the heavy slam, you need to let it swing at least twice. Okay, next up for the axe mode, we want to show the offset, which there are 2 options for with this attack in particular. You can see that it's got quite a bit of delay, which is not too fun and makes it quite hard to land even at the best of times. You need to understand a monster's moveset to reliably do this, but it is incredible when you do. Just for some monster examples, arkveld is one of my favourite monsters to offset, whether it's a chain slam or some of the aerial stuff, bringing it down and then slapping it with a follow-up feels amazing. But it's important to know that there's essentially a slow offset rising slash and then a faster one that has a quicker wind up. So as you're doing different axe attacks, that slow offset can actually come out a little bit quicker, as we'll discuss. In any case, the offset attack must be flying through the air as it collides with the enemy attack, and you have 2 follow-ups. The triangle one, which is the heavy slam, that also activates power axe as one of your options, as you saw there. This is reasonable damage, and if you're desperate for switch gauge, and maybe you've run out of your power axe, then this is something you should consider. The majority of the time, I'm doing the other option, which as you can see is the follow-up morph slash, which does this big burst of damage and a heavy vile pop at the end of it, which feels incredible. And then you end that in sword mode to immediately go for like a counter or whatever combo you want to follow up with. So that's the initial version of the offset and a lot of the axe mode options. Now let's talk about transformation attacks into sword, because I think that'll be a cleaner way to go about it. So just standing here and trying to transform will do nothing and go into the other mode. But if I'm doing a forward movement, I can morph slash and do the sword attack forward. If I do just a standing triangle overhead, I go into a standard morph slash. Whereas if I do wild swings and transform, we get something entirely different, the morph sweep, which is actually a really long combo that does some really solid damage in fact. So I do my wild swings and then I transform, dealing 1 hit, 2 hit, 3 hit, and then a 4th at the end. It's pretty cool. So you just got to be aware that that's more of a longer combo for a transformation. Alright, so next we have sword combos. For the triangle, we have a triple combo of right and then left rising slash, ending in overhead slash. This is actually a decent DPS combo if you transform at the end of it from morph double slash straight into a morph slash. That's 3 pretty quick hits. With skills like rapid morph existing, the damage of this will be increased and the general transformation will be quicker too. Meanwhile, for the circle combo, we have the classic double slash into heavenward flurry, which is your best way to build amped sword mode. So you'll be doing a lot of that to build up the amped state. Now, that triangle combo with the double transform is a valid and solid way to spend some of that amped state. But ultimately, we have a new super move to use in wilds, and that is your best DPS, so it's kind of hard to justify doing anything but that. So, the new super move. By pressing R2, triangle and circle at the same time, we're able to activate it. And it has 2 versions. There's the weak quick version and the stronger charged version. The weak quick version will be automatically used if you are not in amped sword state. So as I go to try to hold it, it's going to end early and do the weak unbridled slash, as you can see. But If I'm in the amped state, we can do the full release slash, the true version, which, as you can see, charges for a lot longer, but when it goes off, my god does it hit hard, which is awesome. But you might be wondering, what's that long animation where I'm slamming the axe behind me? That kind of feels bad. Well, I guess you could roll out of it, which is obviously an option, but there's some follow-up choices here that you got to think about. So as we go into the full release slash, let's land the axe behind us and follow it with a triangle, which will immediately bring us into a spiral burst slash, the best switch gauge builder attack we have. So that allows us to re-loop building back the switch axe, go back into sword mode, and maybe do another full release slash. Let me show you what that could look like. So we're going to do one of these full release slashes. We're going to follow it with that spiral that's going to build up loads of that switch gauge back. Then we're going to transform back into sword, right? As soon as that's done, we go straight back into full release. This is a really nasty combo that could be done on a down monster. By now, it's going to be getting back up, so it doesn't really seem that realistic to continue into a third one and just keep pumping this ridiculous DPS. But of course, it's technically possible because we've got that spiral attack at the end. Here, I have done 4 full releases back to back, uninterrupted. Monsters aren't going to allow that, but it's technically possible for me to just keep doing this until we fully run out of that amp stay. And this is the highest DPS combo that you technically could do if it was ever possible in a real fight. But I did say there's another side to this. What happens when that axe is just laying behind me, not doing anything? There is actually another option you can do. Imagine you've just done a full release, right? You smacked a monster for great damage, but it's active and it's turning and it's about to hit you. You can't exactly do the spiral spin with the axe. You're gonna have to roll. Or maybe instead you can offset. So, example, let's go into full release, let it do its whole thing. The axe lands behind me, I'm looking at the monster, and offset. And that one actually comes out quicker than the default standing one, which you can see the difference between the two. The one that happens after you slam with full release, it just goes kind of straight up, whereas the standing one, it kind of whips it out much further to your left, bringing it around in a slower, more awkward arc, and that's why it feels different. One of them's actually quicker than the other. So after a full release, or even say the Unbridled, we're putting the axe behind us and going offset based on what the monster's doing, allowing you to play very aggressive even if the monster's active, if you're confident about your offset timing. And so the skill cap of switch axe feels great because when you get really good at this stuff and really understand the monsters, you're just an unstoppable force. Now there's a couple more details to do with the sword mode that I want to talk about. For example, when you're just doing the triangle combos, you can actually move around a little bit, not quite like a sword and shield, but there is definitely some movement here, and especially when I've got focus mode, I can stay on the target. If you're just fishing, you're not sure what the monster's doing, this keeps you kind of free and ready to go. Which could in fact, be an evade if you're about to get hit or something, or it could be the counter rising slash, which as you just saw there was a perfect version, which basically had no chip damage and helped me build up the amp stay even faster. So by pressing R2 and triangle together on a PlayStation controller, you do this pretty forgiving counter animation that forces out these 2 follow-up hits. So as I land this in a better timing, we can see that I've got a perfect counter instead. You can really pull this out, but you need to not be in an animation lock to do it, so the basic triangle combos are nice for that because you can just throw it out when you need to. What's cool about this is it builds a lot of amp state and it smoothly combos into Heavenward Flurry. Now Heavenward Flurry is the combo I told you that builds the most amp state for the sword, but first you've got to get through double slash to get it. So rather than doing the first circle attack to get there, you might instead do a counter and then go straight into that really awesome Heavenward Flurry for a lot of amp buildup, as you can see. Now, we have another super move in sword mode that we got to talk about. There is element discharge, which is kind of the standing weak version, and then we have zero sum, which can actually attach to the target. So, element discharge, pressing triangle and circle together, and then tapping triangle to continue it, or holding back on the left stick to cancel it early. Now, what's interesting about element discharge is that it combos nicely into full release. So you could do an element discharge, hold R2, and immediately go into full release like so. Then, this could combo into the classic spiral burst. We could transform into the double rising, go back into a full release. It's pretty cool how the way a lot of this stuff just smoothly combos into one another. But I did say that there is a zero-sum version where you attach, and all you need to do for that is hold triangle and circle rather than press them to initiate the move. You hold them, then it presses into the monster, and then we start tapping triangle, or hold it to end it sooner. This is damage that you can deal with hyper armor, so the monster cannot stop you from doing that, and it's a really useful thing to be able to do against a flyer, a monster that's about to leave, whether there's lots of movement and it's unpredictable. But there's a really cool detail with zero sum that makes it still a meta relevant move, is that if you use a leap off a ledge, there's something called the jumping element discharge that appears and is an option. So as I jump and press that triangle circle, I zero sum discharge attach to a monster from the air. Imagine that against any flying monster, or in general being able to suddenly do a quick attach while you're moving through the air. Super cool. And the thing about that is you don't have to be in sword mode to do it. You can literally do it from axe mode as well for some reason. So that's a super cool thing you're able to do, and something you want to take advantage of in those scenarios or ledges next to the fight. So that about covers it for the sword mode. There's obviously a lot to it, but what about transforming into axe mode? This is actually pretty important. When you do one of these morph slashes from sword into axe mode, you can combo into something else, such as the final triangle combo, the all-important spiral burst slash, the thing that builds the most switch gauge. So if you're low on switch gauge, you can just literally combo twice from morph slash back to axe and combo that into a burst slash. And it's very easy to do because those attacks come out pretty quick. And if you have rapid morph, which you should, it's very quick. Let's say you're far away from the target and you want to make a lot of distance. You could do a moving forward transform into that forward circle, the forward overhead slash, from massive distance, again, without using any stamina. Important because this is a weapon that can benefit from maximum might, which is a lot of affinity to work with. But you need to manage your stamina in that way, so something to think about. There's only other one transformation to axe that really matters though, and it's basically the difference of doing one axe attack with your transform like that, or say doing one of these rising slashes and then doing a double slash instead, which is pretty cool. So that's one way to do it, right after one of your triangle attacks. But it can also be done after you go for the counter, like so. So as I transform into axe mode, it's going to be the double slash right there as well. Not too important, but an extra swing for one button press is useful. So that's a lot of the things you can do. Let's now talk about a couple of other side of things, like say aerial and focus mode, though let's start with focus mode because that's important. In short, focus mode allows you to move towards your target more accurately and with greater distance. There's some sort of magnetism effect that works. So as I don't have a focus towards my target, I move forward and press circle, and that's the distance that I go. It's not a massive distance. So let's say from this corner towards the target, let's do it. This is as far as I go, just on top of these rocks. In roughly the same spot then, we're going to do the same forward circle. Let's see how far I go. So yeah, the rocks were where I went, about there where I'm aiming, and I made it a little bit further. By being focused on your target, you make bigger distances towards it. Outside of that, the obvious but important detail is the fact that being focused on your target means you're unlikely to miss. Where your hit zones of your attacks are, you're able to aim them by using the camera a bit better. And you can stay accurate on your target while moving around it, which, since we do have some moving attacks, is important. But you do also have one of the best focus strikes in the game, at least in my opinion. There are two versions of it. If you do the focus strike while in axe mode, you do a specific combo. If you do the focus mode strike while in sword mode, you'll do a different ending. But there's a cool detail to do with it that allows you to swap between them whenever you like, which is the transformation. But let me first do each type. So here's the axe focus mode strike, which is this nice combination that ends with a nice power axe finisher, literally activating power axe, another way to do it. This can be great for building switch gauge, and obviously activating power axe should you need it. The other option then is to activate the focus strike while in sword mode. It's going to be another combination of attacks, but this time it ends with a zero sum, or element discharge rather, finisher. The thing about the sword mode finisher and the element discharge is that that can be comboed into an unbridled slash or a full release if you're charged up. So you see, I can immediately go into an unbridled slash, which as we know can be defined into spiral burst or an offset, so on and so on. But if I'm already amped up then, we're going to go straight into this big explosion at the end, and then as I hold R2, this time we go into full release, which is even stronger. So this is really good to do, and what I would try to do with my wounds rather than generating power axe, because obviously there's multiple ways to do that. We can do it from standstill, and obviously it's going to be a lot more damage. So the cool thing about this focus strike is that you can transform during it. So I'm entering in axe mode, but I want to end in sword mode. So I just press R2 during it, and now I'm in sword mode. Or vice versa. I could be in sword mode to start with, and as I'm going, I transform into axe mode and end instead in power axe finisher. Just end in the thing you want, whether that's power axe or the explosion of element discharge. Last up, we have the aerial attack, so let's talk about that. Everyone generally gets a unique dismount attack from the seikret by pressing triangle and circle together at the same time. So here's our dismount attack. It's a double strike using the axe, so you'll hit twice if pressed up against it. It's the best way to build them out. From the back of the seikret though, we can jump and press triangle to do a slash with the axe, or you can go into sword mode by jumping and pressing R2 by comparison. This is similar when we look at, say, how we exit from a ledge. So jumping with the sword, we've got those jumping slashes. Or if we go into the axe mode, same thing, but then we have the jumping slash with the axe. As we said before though, this is where you can do the really cool stuff by jumping and element discharging. Here we've got like a standstill one, but if you're in the amp state, this will instead do the zero sum from the air, letting you attach, as we showed earlier. Absolutely insane. Super cool to be able to do that. But what really sucks is that that's only available from a ledge jump specifically. It'd be so cool if we could do that from a seikret jump, making it more reliable. The other kind of attacks we have for aerial are slides, so you're sprinting downhill and then you can press triangle to go into the axe, doing a slash in the air. Or as you should expect, we can instead press R2 to go into the air with the sword, which can be comboed into another follow-up hit. And technically as well, you know, if you really want to, you could go up into the air and then go for a jumping element discharge, which is pretty cool. Right, that's quite a lot to talk about. It's got a lot going for it, the Switch Axe in Wild, which is pretty cool. But what are your best, well, DPS combos as well as your best combos for different reasons? Let's start with examples of that. Your best amp state builder, as we've said throughout this video, is of course the Heavenward Flurry combo. So we do circle double slash into Heavenward Flurry, and that builds it. As we said, we can also combo off a counter rising slash straight into that, if you successfully land the counter, that is, as another great way. By comparison, you're going to want to be doing a lot of spiral burst attacks with your axe to build up the switch gauge, which as we've said, can be done off the back of most transformations from sword to axe with a morph slash. So you could literally press R2 back to sword, R2 back to axe, and triangle to spiral burst slash. That's something you'll be doing a lot of. So what's the top DPS thing you can do? It's ultimately full release slash, as we've been saying. So you charge into this, we're going to do a nice big hit here, which should be about 400 something damage, 385 there with 10 hits. Go into this, transform into the rising double, and then we go for another. So we're currently at 526, 16 hits, and then we go into the second one. That's nearly 1000 damage with absolutely no skills, and obviously a basic hope weapon. This combo will be fast enough to do these 2 full releases with that 1 spiral burst in between with a monster that's vulnerable, so knocked down, trapped, or whatever. As I showed in the earlier section, you could technically do that like up to 5 times during one amp state if nothing's to stop you just doing it the whole time, which is obviously not realistic, but it is technically the most DPS you could do with this weapon on paper. The alternative to full release is of course the element discharge into zero sum discharge. This is going to do some great damage on another longer animation. It actually does more than full release in its one use, but you see that long animation where I'm held in place. It looks cool, but I can't do anything. And I certainly can't combo it into, say, a spiral burst, an offset, and then another full release or zero sum or something. It's just like a one and done kind of thing. Obviously, it is super good because you're able to not be stopped with the hyper armor. A monster that's moving around unpredictably, flying, whatever. It's a good thing to be able to do. As a reminder, you always have this option as a great DPS option too. It's triangle 3 times. Overhead, into right, into left, and then the transform. That's a double, into the transform. And we're back. A lot of this can be done while you're moving around, and you're nice and freed and not too animation locked to maybe pull out that counter should you need it. What's cool about the transformation is you're helping manage your switch gauge as well, and you're just kind of staying neutral, ready for anything, while doing reasonable DPS, so I quite like that. I'll also say that the offsets are pretty damn great. You can build up a lot of switch gauge in your power axe mode after landing those, or go for the amazing transform attack version, which is going to be that huge single hit and the big Val pop. That's actually great DPS too. But you know, you do offsets when you can. I also really like for DPS to rely on the focus strike, because you know, you can go into Unbridled and full release after it, which is a really smooth combo. You just hold R2 and you're straight into it. Then that can go straight into spiral, and then the transform, back back into the sword, and so on and so on. So a good interrupt with a focus attack can lead to quite a lot of staggers and knockdowns as well. So let's talk about optimal openings in the gameplay loop advice. We should always start with a sneak attack because not only is it great damage, but it's the axe slam attack, so this will activate power axe mode, which is amazing as an opener for a fight. Then you can try to move forward at the same time as doing a transform. This will transform you into the sword mode and do that nice forward moving sword attack that we talked about, putting you in range to go for maybe another triangle attack like an overhead. Maybe even 2, if you can squeeze that in before, you go into the sword counter to counter the inevitable roll. This will help you build up a lot of amped state, and then because you actually just did the sword counter, you can combo into the heavenward combo, which builds loads of amp, and ultimately get to amp state. Now you're amped or you're finishing that goal, you can really begin your general gameplay, which is about maintaining power axe as much as you can and performing regular transforms from sword into axe to get spiral burst and keep the switch gauge high. We'll maximize the heavenward flurry combo from double slashes or the counter, and then just keep yourself amped as much as possible. And we're trying to land those full releases whenever a window allows, but we might cancel out of them if it looks bad, maybe go into a nice offset and control the fight. In general, those offsets are heavily rewarded, but you do need to keep in mind that it's only the first offset of a fight that gives you that nice mini knockdown on the monster. Following offsets will require multiple in a row before you get that animation again. But that doesn't mean you can't do follow-up attacks like the transforms. Like I said though, you can always rely on zero-sum attaches for some reliable DPS if the monster's being unpredictable or flying or whatever, and we'll generally fish for openings for full release with some sword overhead attacks with regular transformation attacks between, and maybe counters when we need to. For a quick rundown of some of the best or ideal skills for Switch Axe, I'd like to highlight Power Prolonger, which is going to boost the duration your weapons are powered up. Whether that's your axe or the sword, it means you're dealing with those things a lot less, and that lets you stay focused on DPS, which is super helpful. At the same level of required for smooth gameplay, Rapid Morph is back. Obviously, we've been talking about it throughout the video. It's super good. You're going to morph faster, which is important for lots of attacks and reasons, but it also increases the morph attack damage, making those attacks even more viable. Those are the most important things you could possibly run, I would say, for Switch Axe. Other things exist that are going to be useful, such as burst or maximum might if you can manage it, but this steps away from specifically about Switch Axe. The only other skill that I suppose I should mention that is really nice to have, but is more of a quality of life thing, is focus. It's going to help you build those gauges, which is obviously nice, but it's super hard to actually fit. So if you had a main skill and then the secondary skill in an offensive slot, just one level of focus, could be nice. But there you have it. That is my guide to Switch Axe and its current launch version of Wilds. I hope that's covered absolutely everything you could possibly want to know about it. There is a lot of context stuff and advice that I needed to give that I hope has been very useful. But as always, if you guys have any more information or tips or anything like that at all, then let us know in the comments. But if you liked the video, please do drop a like. We put a lot of work into these. For now then, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.